Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we've been talking about all the players who've been moving around the country, but let's talk about the coaches and their systems. Today, we'll be deep diving into 10 Power 4 coaching changes that could have huge impacts on who you could be drafting this offseason. All of that and more coming right after this.
Looking to throw. Caught. Tony off and running. He doesn't lose foot races. Touchdown Miami.
Jackson going to the end zone. What a night, Bo Sparks. Make it 4.
Shakes through a couple of tacklers. Still on his feet. Hawkins to the end zone. Unbelievable.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus to Canton Podcast Network. You can find us in all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campustocanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether that is CFF, Devy, C2C, College DFS, Underdog Best Ball. If you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to support the show directly, make sure when you sign up for one of our yearly memberships, you use that promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. Again, that is promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, that's totally fine. You can just leave us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast side of things, just leave us a 5-star review and make sure you are following the show. Not only does that show us support, but also the entire game of college fantasy football in general, a ton of support. If you have any further questions or want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I am at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fella to my right is Mr. Chris Battistel at FFChrisB on Twitter. Chris, how you doing, man?
I'm gravy, baby. I'm living, I'm laughing, and I'm loving, Jared. March is right around the corner. 41 trips around the sun for me. I'm ready to go, man. One step closer to 50.
Wait a minute. Are you implying that it was your birthday? It is your birthday.
Yeah. Friday. Friday was my birthday. I'm excited. I was excited for it. Got a new bag of sticks, so I'm ready to hit the golf course. I'm geared up to go, Jared. Geared up to go, baby.
I am not in a position where I can buy myself a whole set of clubs. So what I have been doing is slowly but surely adding to a collection. It is going to be just like one by one, whether it's in garage sales, like my dad had a couple of clubs and everything. So I'm just slowly but surely just grabbing them, sticking them in my garage. And I'm like, one day I'll have a full set. So that'll be my first set.
You really only need like 4 to 6 clubs.
Yeah,
maybe.
you need
like
the
half
driver.
The clubs I don't even use.
I would say driver,
putter.
Wood, cutter, and then obviously the putter. Wait, you said putter. I thought you said cutter.
Putter, yeah.
I'm like,
cutter, cigar cutter. It's important in the bag when you're golfing. So yeah, you need to have one of those as well.
True. So, Chris, we got coaching changes here today. We're going to talk Power 4 coaching changes. We usually split this up into 2 episodes every single year. And we've been talking players a whole lot, but really the coaching changes, one, have been a staple of college fantasy forever, right? Like even before the transfer portal, this is how the offseason got shaken up every single year, right? I mean, coaches move all over the place, and this year was no exception. There were some big time teams opening up, big time programs opening up for coaches to move around to and everything. Not so much like the CFF systems we come to know and love. Obviously, there's a really big one. We'll talk about that one first. But some of the big time ones were, Penn State opened up. Obviously, LSU. Again, we'll talk about that. Michigan opened up. We'll talk about that one as well. Definitely one of the more chaotic ones. Probably not as big as the one from a couple years ago when, Lincoln Riley left for USC and then Brian Kelly leaves for LSU. Like that one still sticks out in my mind as probably the most chaotic coaching change season, but this one's a pretty good contender. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, given that one of the coaching changes happened just right before the college football playoff last season, like you mentioned, with LSU and Lane Kiffin, the theatrics of it is fun to watch from the outside looking in, and the SEC especially is just caught up in this giant carousel of coaching changes, which leads to some great insight into what each of these programs are going to be and how much they're going to change, how much the outlook is going to change offensively and defensively with these new coaches, especially with some of these coaches moving up from, smaller programs going up to the big SEC, man.
It was weird the last couple of years in the SEC that for the most part things were relatively stagnant. There wasn't like a lot of coaching moves for the most part. And then all of a sudden this past year, like you said, I mean, we like Auburn,
6 or
LSU,
8, I
Ole
think it
Miss,
was. Yeah.
no, Missouri stayed put, but Florida, you lose.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm like blanking. Oh, Arkansas as well. Like again, I think
Yeah.
nearly half the SEC teams made a coaching change this offseason, which was just
Wild.
absolutely wild. But again, it makes sense that something like that would happen after a couple of dormant years there, right? A lot of programs
Sure.
kind of get to the end of, usually it's the third year for most coaches. A lot of programs will make that decision of, all right, is this our guy? Are we going to try to keep him, or are we going to move on here? Seemed like a lot of SEC schools were very ready to move on, and now it's only going to get worse because Kirk Cinetti has raised the expectations of every mid program in the country. That your new head coach better be winning you a title within 2 years, because if Kirk Cinetti could do it at Indiana, there's no excuse for your guy not to do it.
No excuse.
Despite the fact that there were 100 different factors that came together to make that an incredible run for Indiana there. But don't expect the casual fan or even the casual program like manager to understand that. Yeah. All that being said, Chris, we got 10 major guys we got here. We got 5 more that we've thrown in as honorable mentions, and we'll definitely get to that. But let's start with the big one. After I throw it to some ads, I almost forgot about the ads. Austin from Campus of Canton's got a couple of. Yep, I know. And I even left the square on here. Look at me. This is amateur hour over here, man. I had just a random square sitting in the middle of the page. While I gather my bearings, Austin's going to tell you about some awesome partners we have over at Campus of Canton. So Austin, save me for a few minutes here.
Hey guys, Austin here to talk for a brief moment about Home Field Apparel, the best place to snag clothing for all my favorite schools and teams. Whether it's tees, sweatshirts, hats, joggers, or pretty much anything in between, Home Field Apparel has retro designs with a modern twist to satisfy fans from Ohio State to Drexel to Colorado School of the Mines. Plus, it's some of the comfiest clothing that I own. Use our promo code CAMPUS2CANTON, that's campus, the number 2 Canton at checkout, for 15% off your first purchase. What's up, guys? Austin here again to let you know about our partnership with Fast Draft, a best ball and DFS platform that hosts a ton of different contests. With the season over and season-long CFF best ball behind us, I know I'm looking for new contests that can scratch my drafting itch. And I think I have found just the thing. Fast Draft has a rookie-only contest called Origins. Each draft has 8 teams in it and is 6 rounds long. And as I mentioned earlier, you only draft incoming 2026 rookies. I know I plan on max entering this thing, and I think it's going to be a ton of fun. So head on over to Fast Draft, and when you sign up, use code C2C, that's C2C, for a deposit match up to $50. Happy drafting.
All right, we are back, and I clicked on the wrong page. This is just going fantastic. Over to the right page here. We're doing great. Now that I've collected my bearings, Chris, let's talk about the first major head coaching change here in the Power 4 that we have to discuss, and that is, of course, Lane Kiffin headed over to LSU. He brings along with him his offensive coordinator, Charlie Weiss, who a lot of people have credited for the great offenses that he and Kiffin have put together while they've worked together. Obviously, they've worked together at Ole Miss, but even before that, they were together at Florida Atlantic. And when I go back and look at what Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss have done with their offenses, you're going to get stars out of this system because Kiffin and Weiss are both just offensive play calling geniuses, and they know who to feature in their offenses. There's not really a consistency about which position is going to shine year in, year out. The quarterback's a pretty good bet, to be fair.
Yep.
But between the skill positions, running back and wide receiver, it really depends on who they identify as their star, right? Quinshon Judkins was great. The next year, they didn't have anybody at running back, and it was very much a by committee approach over there, right? Trey Harris, absolutely phenomenal 2 years ago before he got hurt. And then the last 2 years, it's been a bit more of a committee situation at wide receiver, right? It split to about 2 to 3 guys the year after him. And then last year was a full-on receiver by committee situation. I mean, the best wide receiver that they had in points per game was Harrison Wallace. He only had 10.5 fantasy points per game. Speaking of which, I should also highlight exactly what Kiffin did last year. I should go ahead and read off the chart here. Again, I'm just on it tonight. Last year, Kiffin for Ole Miss put together an offense that was 3rd in the country in overall offense and yards per game, 4th in the country for passing yards, 34th in rushing offense. His QB1 in Trinidad Chambliss averaged 25.2 fantasy points per game. That is good for QB 18 in that stat. And the RB1, Keywan Lacey, averaged 23 fantasy points per game, and that's good for RB5 on the year. So like I said, identified his 2 main stars last year. Trinidad Chambliss, as soon as he got the start, they realized they had something special there. And then obviously, Keywan Lacey, man, just got almost every carry that Ole Miss was willing to hand out last year. So really the question now becomes, Chris, Kiffin moves over to LSU, doesn't bring a ton. Like, it doesn't bring over people kind of like how we thought he was going to potentially do to Ole Miss. So who are the stars that he and Charlie Weiss are going to identify this year?
Well, it's like you mentioned, it's gonna be the quarterback. His fantasy quarterbacks have always given us this safe kind of production floor. His QBs over his time coaching with the Rebels averaged 24.81 fantasy points per game. That was really propped up by Matt Corral in 2020, where he averaged 30 fantasy points per game through 9 games. Now you're hoping that he can elevate Sam Levitt the way he elevated Jackson Dart in Dart's last season under the coaching staff. In Dart's first 2 seasons with Lane Kiffin, before that 2024 season, he was middle of the pack when it came to stretching the field. He was utilizing his legs, but when it came time to pushing the ball downfield, he was middle grouping quarterbacks. But in that 2024 season, he was first amongst all quarterbacks with pass attempts over 20 yards with 81. And we've touched on Sam Levitt a little bit before in some of our past episodes, where I was kind of hesitant on the quarterback because of his lack of being able to utilize that part of his game, the lack of pushing the ball downfield. And if you look at Dart's production before that 2024 season, he was averaging 20.31 fantasy points per game. In 2024, when he started to stretch the field, that number jumped up to 26.11. So that's a 6-point jump in fantasy points per game. The floor, like I said, the floor for the quarterback is gonna be there. Kiffin and the coaching staff are gonna utilize the quarterback's legs. Sam Levitt should give us a solid fantasy production out of the position. I want to touch on the wide receivers as well, because that's where I think it gets a little bit dicey when it comes to elite production. It's not a position that I'm going to be too bullish on. I have been known, at least in the past few drafts, Jared, as you've seen, I've been known to draft Jace Brown maybe a little bit too high, especially because he hasn't been identified as the guy in this offense. The primary wide receiver aligned out wide for these offenses have averaged 11.91 fantasy points per game. The slot wide receiver gets a little bit better, where they're averaging 13.37 fantasy points per game. And again, just like the quarterback, those numbers are propped up by big performances by one individual. Trey Harris, like you mentioned, I think that one season he was averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. And then Elijah Moore had that year where he was averaging, I think, over 25 fantasy points per game. Now, I also want to touch on the tight end position because
Was
Trey
Elijah
Des
Moore
Green.
during Kiffin's reign?
Oh, 2020, yeah?
Has Lane Kiffin really been there that long?
Yeah.
No way. Holy mackerel.
Double check that for me before
I'm saying this as a 26-year-old over here. Oh yeah, that was Lane Kiffin's first season. Yep.
Yeah, first season. In that first season, Elijah Moore was dominant as the primary slot wide receiver. But I just want to touch on the tight end before we wrap up this coaching staff here, because Trey Des Green is getting drafted amongst the top 5 at the position, top 5 tight ends. But the tight end hasn't really been that dominant force you want for a fantasy tight end that you're picking at the top 5 of the position across the. I just averaged out 5 seasons for the position. They've averaged 56.66 fantasy points on the year. On a per game basis, that's 5.76 fantasy points per game. They average about 22.4 catches, 298 receiving yards, and 2.6 receiving touchdowns. On a per game basis, 2.29 catches, 30.5 receiving yards, and just under or just over a quarter of a touchdown per game. He has had some high-end output from the position. We saw Daquan Wright put up some big numbers. He averaged 7.41 fantasy points per game in his best year. And then Michael Trigg, through 6 games, averaged 7.2 fantasy points per game during those 6 games. But these are not world-beating numbers. The system can absolutely produce a usable tight end 1, but it's more of a secondary or third option amongst this offense. It's not the go-to position for what they want to do when they're passing the ball. Granted, though, they've never really had a player at the position like Trey Des Green. So it's going to be interesting to see if he's the player that they identify early to be the one that they want to go to in this offense, Jared.
There's a big old name you're missing.
Who am I missing?
You went back 5 years. You should have gone back 6, my friend.
Should have gone back 6.
Because in 2019, when Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss were the head coach and offensive coordinator at Florida Atlantic, a good old fellow by the name of Harrison Bryant, tight end, 94 targets, 65 catches, 1,004 yards, and 7 touchdowns, an absolute monster under this duo. And yes,
but that's an outlier, right?
Yes, so but you said it. You said it. If they identify Green as one of their major guys, they've shown, as I kind of hinted at, or not hinted at, as I said at the beginning of the segment, if they identify him as one of their stars, they're going to feed him. Now, am I expecting 94?
Which could very well be.
Yeah. Am I expecting 94 targets for Trey Des Green this year? Absolutely not. I got him projected at 45 because that's what they've gotten the last couple of years, right? But if they don't, if obviously we're both in on Jace Brown, but what if none of the other receivers really behind them really work out? Like Trey Wilson, he's just washed, right? Jackson Harris doesn't make that jump from Mountain West to the SEC, right?
SEC. Yep.
I like Winston Watkins, but he's a young guy as well. There is an easy path for Trey Des Green to being the second major option in this passing attack versus at Ole Miss the last couple of years, they've been pretty loaded at wide receiver. So I understand people wanting to get in on Trey Des Green, even though I'm not as high on him. I got him a tight end 9 in my rankings. So the other position I want to ask you about, Chris, it's been real up and down with the running back for Lane Kiffin the last couple of years, right? Quinshon Judkins, and then we get Parrish last year. That was kind of okay. Mm-hmm. And then this year they get Kewan Lacey.
Yeah.
Between the 3 major options here, between Harlem Berry, Caden Durham, who they convinced to come back out of the portal, and Dylan Jones, is there a particular favorite that you would be willing to take a shot on? Or are you kind of avoiding this and you think this is a committee situation year one?
I I said it once and I'll say it again. I will pick anybody at value. If I see a guy falling and I think it's a perfect spot to kind of jump on the player because of the values there, I'm gonna take them. But as of right now, I'm gonna if I have to pick what is let's play a game, F M K. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna Harlan Berry the first one. And then I'm gonna marry Caden Durham because, like you said, they convinced him to come back. He probably has the highest potential as of right now to be the fantasy producing running back in this room. And then Dylan Jones, I'm sorry, but man, cement shoes for you, buddy.
Yeah, I need to see it to believe it with Dylan Jones. I in my rankings um have both Durham and Harlem Berry projected out, and I have them very close. Or I actually have Durham ahead by a decent bit. Durham at
Okay,
RB 77, Harlem Berry at RB 93. Granted, Durham had that freshman year where he looked really, really good, and that has helped his projection quite a bit. Versus Harlem Berry got
sure.
run last year, even more run than Durham, but it wasn't very explosive, right? You're talking about 4.5 yards per carry, breakaway percentage of around 30%, which is good. You're hitting that threshold that I want, but I agree with you. I think Durham has the highest potential of this room. I think the staff made sure to go out and bring him back out of the portal for a reason. So I'm willing to take a shot on him. He's actually going later than Barry in these early drafts. I'd much rather take the shot on Durham a couple rounds later. All right,
Yeah, I'm with you.
let's go ahead and move on to our second coaching change of the episode, and that is highlighting Mr. Jason Beck, the former offensive coordinator at
Yeah.
Utah, head over to Michigan. Of course, he is joined by his head coach, Kyle Whittingham, going from Utah to Michigan as well. But really, this offense is Jason Beck's baby, so that's why he's getting the highlight here. Last year for Utah, did you know that Utah was fourth in the country in yards per game at 480? The passing, not so great at 214.3 yards per game. That was 81st in the country, but man, that rushing attack was absolutely dynamic.
Tremendous.
265.8 rushing yards per game. That's second in the country. And then, of course, we have our fantasy producers from last year. The highlight being the quarterback, Devin Dampier, QB 14 on the year in fantasy points per game, scored 26 points per game. RB1, Wayshawn Parker, disappointed compared to where people were drafting him last year. RB 67 in fantasy points per game at 13.8, but definitely had his highlight games. And the wide receiver one was Ryan Davis, who followed Dampier and Beck from New Mexico. He scored 11.8 fantasy points per game. That was wide receiver 82 for last year. Chris, what are we expecting here with Beck, Whittingham, all moving over to Michigan and the Big Ten here? Are you expecting this offense to translate here? And if so, what does that mean for the pieces that are here?
I'm expecting them to bring the efficiency that they had at Utah over to Michigan. If you're looking at what Utah was able to do on third down in the red zone, it's going to produce opportunity for guys like Bryce Underwood, for guys like Jaden Marshall or Jared.
Andrew Marshall.
Andrew Marshall? Andrew Marsh.
Marsh. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. And the running back, Jordan Marshall, right?
Yes.
Or Jaden Marshall.
Jordan
Marshall, we're all over the place. It's going to give these guys opportunity to stay on the field for more plays, therefore producing more fantasy points and giving this offense more of an opportunity to find their way to the end zone, which is what you want. Utah last year was third in third down efficiency, converting 52.6% of their third down plays. They were third in first downs as well, 331 first downs. They didn't give the ball away all that much. They only threw 5 interceptions as a team. And then looking at their red zone efficiency, they were top 12 in red zone offense. So that alone is giving me some positive insight into what Michigan can be this coming year. You mentioned the production for Wayshawn Parker. Marshall is, at least in my opinion, a much better a player than than what Wayshawn Parker was last year, and the quarterback was used a lot in the rush game as well. If you're looking at what Devin Dampier was able to do, even just near the goal line, he had 7 rushing TDs. Wayshawn Parker had 6. Jason Beck's run offense, the play action that they run, plus the third down efficiency, plus the red zone profile. It also is going to elevate the tight end position. And are we expecting JJ Buchanan to be the guy for Michigan at tight end? He's the guy that I'm seeing constantly drafted. Are you on that boat as well?
So Buchanan's an interesting one, right? Because he is very much in line to be a Tito. He was labeled as a tight end, but switched to wide receiver and has played mostly as a wide receiver. And so if he keeps that eligibility, that's why people are drafting him. In terms of the guy you would expect to probably be the true traditional tight end, you're most likely looking at Hogan Hansen.
Yeah, okay. That's right. And he's going to be the value, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, I would certainly take the shot on that, because even with JJ Buchanan popping off a little bit last year, right? I mean, Dallin Bentley was still a pretty solid tight end for CFF, so I think there's a chance that both of them could work out really, really well. It's just a matter of it matters a lot that Buchanan keep that tight end position, tight end eligibility, because I think Marsh will be the wide receiver 1 for this offense. He has a really good connection with Bryce Underwood. I think he fits what Beck has wanted in a wide receiver 1. I think he's the most talented wide receiver that Beck's had to use. And then Buchanan, likely, if you just look at positions, probably wide receiver 2, but is wide receiver 2 better than tight end 1 for this offense? I guess we're going to find out.
Yeah, we are. I'm also interested to see where you have Bryce Underwood ranked and how much of a jump you're projecting him to take going into his second year. I mentioned that the quarterback at Utah, Devin Dampier, was utilized in the rush game. Bryce Underwood kind of sneakily has that as part of his game. 62 carries last year, 393 rush yards, and 5 rushing TDs. He did only average 15.29 fantasy points per game, and that's just the regular season I'm counting there.
Yeah.
So the baseline is there for the role players in this offense to take the next step with Whittingham and with Jason Beck calling the plays, man.
So you asked about Bryce Underwood. I've got him currently at QB 23.
Oh, that's massive.
If I didn't put any kind of confidence discount on him, he'd probably be a top 5 quarterback for me, because Beck is willing to, like, Beck, again, with Devin Dampier, he's averaged 150 carries the last 2 years. That's going to put a quarterback pretty high up in my projections there, especially one as talented as Bryce Underwood there. But I did put some confidence discount in there, because I don't think he's actually going to run Bryce Underwood 150 times. I think more realistically, you're probably looking at, 80, 90, and that's still really good, and that's still going to get you a really solid quarterback for CFF. I just don't know, because like raw projections is saying that Underwood could be a 1,000-yard rusher at quarterback this year. I'm not buying that. I'm definitely looking at more around like upside of 600-800 rushing yards.
Yeah, okay. Even 8, I think, it might be a little bit.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Because he did have the carries, but he wasn't overly efficient with the carries that he had, right?
He had about 6.7 yards per carry last year. So he put in some good work with that.
That's fair.
I mentioned before that I am also very interested in the wide receiver 1 for this offense, because it is kind of very sneakily been the last 2 years a solid volume spot, because Luke Weissong had over 100 targets in 11 games. I think Ryan Davis had like 92 targets last year as the wide receiver 1. The averages out to about 100 targets between the two of them. And quite frankly, neither of them are anywhere near as talented as Andrew Marsh. Andrew Marsh was great last year as a true freshman, catching nearly 75% of his targets, 14.5 yards per catch. Those are better numbers at a harder level of competition than anybody that Beck's had to work with so far in the FBS. So I really like Andrew Marsh this year. I currently have him projected as a top 36 wide receiver, and if I start hearing good news out
Love
of
that.
spring camp, he could easily start moving up for me because I think you give him the volume that those two guys have gotten the last couple of years, very, very solid ad in your mid-round draft picks right now.
Yeah, yeah, and if if you put together more drive success, what this team, what the system has been able to do at Utah, and you marry that to more red zone trips in this system, it raises the easiest stat to spike for Andrew Marsh, which is TDs, and he only had 3 last year in the 12 games. So there's good opportunity that his production floor raises quite a bit with Beck as the play caller.
Not to spend too much time on this because I know we got to keep moving on at some point, but I do want to talk about Jordan Marshall because this is a guy that in my projections I kind of had to fudge a little bit because if I just take raw projections over the last 2 years, the RB1 for Jason Beck has averaged 140 carries. Right?
Ooh, okay.
That's not fantastic.
Yeah,
And
it's not.
that would
Yeah.
knock Jordan Marshall down quite a bit in my projections. But I don't think that's what's going to happen, right? Like I
Mhm.
don't if Marshall was getting any kind of hint that he wouldn't be like a clear number 1 back for this Michigan offense, he'd be gone. Right? Especially with Sharon Moore leaving and everything. Like there's the opportunity there to go find another spot, right? Just like Justice Haynes did. Right?
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
stayed. That tells me the stat believes he's going to be the RB1. So what I did in my projections is I just took what Marshall was kind of averaging in the games where he was the number 1 guy and then projected that out over a full season. That gets me about 185 carries. I think that's more realistic. Chris, do you think I am fudging my numbers too much here and I should just rely on just the pure projections there? Or what are your thoughts?
I think this early in the process of trying to project these guys out without having any kind of real news coming out of these programs, I think you're kind of spot on because really you're just using what history is giving us to use to try to project what these guys are going to be able to do. Maybe fudging them just a little bit too much, but I mean, at this point, we're only using what they've given us, and I can't be mad at that.
Alrighty. Let's move on to our third coaching change of the episode. We got to talk about Eric Morris, the former head coach of North Texas, headed over to Oklahoma State. As you just said there, Chris, it's a big one. So big that I feel like we've talked about this 3 times already in this season because in every single transfer portal episode, we had one of the big 3 from North Texas heading over here to Oklahoma State, and we talked about whether or not we think they translate. For the most part, we think they will. So I guess really the question is, Chris, like what more is there really to say about this transition going from North Texas to Oklahoma State? Like I said, we've said for the most part we think this is a pretty solid move. You know, going from the American Athletic Conference to the Big 12 is the least hard jump you can make from the G5 to the Power 4. I guess what else is there really to say?
Not much that we haven't already touched on outside of he's completely rebuilding this program at Oklahoma State. 40 exits on the offensive side of the ball alone, and that's wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, running backs, and offensive line. He's had 40 players leave Oklahoma State, according to CFBDepthChart.com. So why do you want to buy in? It's the offense that he's run 13 seasons as head coach or offensive coordinator at UNT. He's produced a top 5 passing offense 9 times, top 10 total offense 10 times, and a top 25 scoring offense 10 times across those 13 seasons. So the system is there for production. I think they might struggle a little bit out the gate as the unit tries to mesh and figure out who they're gonna be as Cowboys. But I'm okay drafting at least Caleb Hawkins, I'm okay drafting Drew Mestamaker. I'm okay drafting Wyatt Young because I think at least for the first part of the season, these three guys are going to be leaned on maybe a little bit more than we expect while the team settles and gets into motion. So it's really the question. The question is going to be, how quickly can Oklahoma State go from install mode to cash mode, where the first downs efficiency that they have can turn into TD volume, like that number one scoring UNT offense that we've seen just last season. So that's pretty much it. Outside of everything that we've already touched on, maybe 2, 3, or 4 times in this I was going to say UNT offense, in this Oklahoma State offense, man.
Like I said, there's really not much more to add. I think it is interesting you're kind of pointing out that it could very well almost be the opposite of what we saw last year, where last year things were kind of getting figured out at the beginning of the year, and that meant there was a lot more spreading around, different stars every single week. And then once they figured out their guys, they rode them the entire second half of the season. Versus this year, it might be that they rely on those guys early, and then as things get more comfortable, you are going to see like potentially more splitting as the season goes on. Especially, I'm thinking at the wide receiver position. I love Wyatt Young. I think he will be the wide receiver one for this offense this upcoming year. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if some of those other wide receivers that they brought in maybe start to emerge as the season goes on, and maybe we see an opposite effect of what we saw last year, where, Wyatt Young's
that's a great point,
getting massive amount of targets early on, and then things start to kind of dissipate as the season goes along. That wouldn't shock me whatsoever. And as you pointed out, and again, I forgot to read off here again, this unit was phenomenal last year. Again, number 1 in yards per game, second in pass yards per game, 19th in rushing offense per game, and just the absolute dream scenario for CFF, right? A top 20 quarterback, the number 1 overall running back, a top 5 wide receiver. You can't get much better than that. That's why all those guys are once again going super high in drafts. Again, I'd say probably the only one I'm a little hesitant on is Wyatt Young, and even then, I'm still drafting him.
That's fair.
I'm still drafting him like late second round if he's there, early third round.
Good luck.
Yeah, if he gets there, I've seen him go 2-8 so far. So maybe he does start to fall down a little bit. So
okay.
All right, let's move on to our fourth one here. Let's talk about Buster Faulkner, the offensive coordinator from Georgia Tech, headed over to Florida, where he'll be the offensive coordinator there. Obviously, he is joining head coach John Summerall, coming over from Tulane. Both of these guys have had both CFF and just general offensive success at the programs that they've been before. You can really kind of imagine there being almost a melding of the minds here between the two of them. Obviously, Faulkner was brought in for a reason, so I have to imagine Summerall is mostly going to rely on Faulkner to run an offense here. But I do think we're going to see a very different kind of offense than what we've seen from Buster Faulkner recently. Granted, again, last year it worked out really well. They were 17th in overall offense in yards per game, over 440 yards. Their passing offense was 43rd with just under 250 yards per game. Rushing offense was pretty great, just under 200 yards, 21st in the country. And boy, Haynes King was phenomenal. QB4 in fantasy points per game, 30.7 points. And then the skill position players, not so great under Buster Faulkner, but that's also not a huge surprise considering the fact that he comes from under the Todd Monken offensive coaching tree, and that very much is a system that likes to spread the ball around, both in terms of the running backs and also the wide receivers. And so, like I said, that doesn't surprise me really much at all, that we, especially last year, we didn't see much. Although, again, if you go back and look, like Eric Singleton, the 2 years he was the wide receiver 1 under Faulkner, 90 targets and 84 targets. So it's possible to get a wide receiver 1, which I imagine we'll discuss here in a minute. But I want to discuss Aaron Philo. I think that's where this offense begins and ends going forward. I think it's a major question of what kind of usage is he going to be getting, right? Are we going to be looking more like Haynes King, where we're running all over the place and, he's a borderline RB1 for this offense? I highly doubt that's going on, especially with the amount of money they paid Jaden Baugh to come back for this offense, right? Yep. I think we're potentially looking at more like a Darian Mensa situation, because if you look at Philo's production, He can run, but it's mostly scrambles. There's very few designed runs, even though he's had multiple starts at GT so far. They never really designed runs for him. I think the most he's had in a single game was 4 designed runs. Very different than what Haynes King was getting, right? Meanwhile, look at this stat line for Darian Mensah under John Summerall just 2 years ago, right? 22 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, and 50 rush attempts for 250 yards and a touchdown, right? That feels extremely within the ballpark here. Maybe a little high on the passing if you don't think he translate up to the SEC there. 9.5 yards per attempt is pretty crazy, but I think that's what we're looking at. A guy that can pass really well. He's going to have a trio of great receivers here, and we can talk about them in a second.
Yep.
I see him scrambling, so probably around that 250, 300 yards by the end of the season, but again, not a guy that we're expecting like Haynes King. Do you kind of agree with my assessment here, Chris?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat with you there with Aaron Philo and what he's going to be able to be at Florida. If you're looking at the Faulkner identity over 2023 to 2025, Georgia Tech has produced the number 1 rushing offense and the number 2 total offense in the ACC, and it hasn't been a run-only scheme. He also had the number 3 pass efficiency offense as well in the ACC. The pass game, though, is built to keep the defense honest. It's not a high volume of pass attempts, especially as we saw with Haynes King just this past year. I'm expecting, run first structure, heavy play action, and an offense designed to stay on schedule rather than live on those deep desperation throws. Now, though, they can kind of have those deep desperation throws with Dallas Wilson, with Vernell Brown, the third. So they're going to be able to do a little bit more things on offense at Florida that they weren't able to do at Georgia Tech. Their efficiency on third down, which is huge. That keeps your fantasy players on the field for that much longer. And Philo knows the system, so he's going to have already an immediate edge walking into Florida. Again, he's going to the SEC. It's going to be a little bit different for him, but I'm liking Jaden Baugh in this offense. He's last year 221 carries, 12 games, 1,100 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 8 rushing TDs. He's already got that goal line equity. I don't think it's a situation where, like in Georgia Tech, Haynes King was really siphoning those red zone goal line touchdowns from the running back position. I think Jaden Baugh is going to see, 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns on the season. So I think that's only going to help Aaron Philo as a quarterback throwing the ball as well as rushing the ball if they try to get a little creative with what this offense is going to do. If the offense becomes a consistent scorer, the easiest stat for Baugh, just like Andrew Marsh, is the spike in touchdowns. He's got 8, but he's already a designated finisher, or he was last year for this offense. And I think he's going to go into 2026 with the same kind of role. So I'm not bullish on Andrew Philo. I think he'll be consistent. I just don't see him, I don't see him averaging 20 fantasy points per game. I maybe 17 to 18. I don't know where you got him with fantasy points, Jared, but that's where I'm kind of at with Philo and this offense.
So I've got Philo at UB 55, and my raw
like 16 fantasy points per game.
No, higher than you'd think. Raw projections at 21.92, but let me take off the discount. Okay, so 19.7 fantasy points per game is kind of what I'm treating him as in my rankings. So I think he'll be solid. I think there'll be a lot of weeks where you're going to be able to plug him in and he'll produce for you, especially in some really solid matchups with some weak secondaries in the SEC. I think you'll be able to rely on him. You talked about 2 of those really talented wide receivers, Vernell Brown and Dallas Wilson. You're also forgetting Eric Singleton. Eric Singleton's returning to Buster Faulkner, coming back from Auburn. And like I said before, he was getting 80, 90 targets last time he was in this system. Now, I think there's a very legit question of who's going to be the wide receiver one between Eric Singleton or Dallas Wilson. Dallas
Absolutely.
Wilson is a phenomenal talent there at Florida, and really we got robbed of seeing him break out in a big way last year due to injury. I've got them right next to each other in my rankings. I've got Eric Singleton at wide receiver 78, Dallas Wilson's at wide receiver 83. Chris, do you have a feel of which one you'd rather go after?
Where do you have Vernell Brown? Sorry,
I don't have Vernell Brown ranked because I think it'll be one of these outside wide receivers that are
one of the two
that are going to be the main guy.
Just like we talked about with the Oklahoma State situation, I think it might be a case where Eric Singleton is the guy early, but then Dallas Wilson is the guy that comes on kind of late. I'd rather have Dallas Wilson as my everyday wide receiver. And if I'm playing in any kind of best ball, I might pivot to just ranking Eric Singleton a little bit more above Dallas Wilson. But I think Dallas Wilson is the more consistent wide receiver in this offense.
My projections have a 3 fantasy point difference between the two of them. That's how close they are.
Yeah.
I legitimately think it can go either way. It's just when you get to that point in the draft, just take a shot on either one. Whichever one's still there, take the shot. I think it'll be worth it. All right.
Yep.
Let's talk about our next coaching hire here, and that is another SEC coach, and that is Mr. Alex Golesh, formerly the head coach of South Florida. Last year, he and the Bulls went on an absolute tear, second in the country in yards per game at 486. We have their passing offense was 15th in the country at 277.6 yards per game. Rushing offense was 12th in the country at 208.8 yards per game. And of course, the highlight of the offense, QB1 on the season last year, Byron Brown. Running back, not so great. It's very typical of Alex Golesh. He has very much a committee approach at running back everywhere he's gone, both at Tennessee and at South Florida here. The RB1 averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game last year. And then wide receiver 1, Keyshawn Singleton, serviceable for CFF last year at 13.6 fantasy points per game. That's good for wide receiver 48. Obviously, he had some huge spike weeks, especially towards the end of the season. I think he had 2 top 10 performances in the last 4 weeks of the season. So very much, this is an offense that on paper you want to invest in, but can we trust it to translate back to the SEC? Especially with the SEC having already seen it before. This was something I wanted to test out because I looked at Tennessee or Auburn's SEC schedule this year. They play they so here's the interesting thing. 5 teams have a head coach that was in the SEC when Alex Golesh last called plays in the SEC when he was at Tennessee. Florida, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Alabama. Outside of Alabama, those are 4 of the easier games that Auburn has this year, and they all have a coach that hasn't really seen this veer and shoot system that Alex Golesh is bringing here. I have questions about making this big of a jump from the American to the SEC, and Byron Brown working out as well. I've seen people draft Byron Brown really, really high in drafts so far. I'm not quite there.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Although I've got him at, where do I got him at? Probably too low. Yeah, too low. I got a QB 50. I probably need to bump him up a little bit, I think. Because the upside is just insane. Let's try this. I'm gonna do something real quick. No, I feel like I gotta be in between. Because like if I put him at the next confidence level, he goes up to QB 24, and I don't really like that either. So it'll be somewhere between QB 24 and 50. We'll find out later. But I back to my point. I think it's interesting about half the schedule will have seen this offense before, half of it will have not. So very much seems like we could get an in-between scenario where there's some really good boom weeks for Byron Brown. There could also be some really tough games where Byron Brown and this offense really fall apart, especially with, the teams that have seen him before. 4 of them, 4 out of the 5 are ranked in the preseason top 25. So
not great.
What are we thinking here, Chris? Are you trusting the translation of this veer and shoot Alex Golesh system to Auburn in year 1?
Jared, before before I jump into this breakdown of Alex Golish on Auburn, to anybody that is not watching this on YouTube and is listening to this podcast wherever you're listening to us, look at the timestamp. Head over to YouTube because my guy Jared here just did my guy Alex Golish no justice with this picture that he picked of him here.
Dude, he's rocking it. What are you talking about?
He looks like my disappointed auntie looking up at me, waiting for me to leave whatever I was doing. Hands on the hips, absolutely disgusted look on his face.
Listen, bro,
I was giggling, so I'm sorry.
He is serving, as the children would say nowadays. He is serving absolute you know what.
Or no, what do the kids say? Mogging? Is he mogging? Is that the
No, he's coach mogging right now. And he's coach maxing and offense mogging. I don't know, man.
He's looking sassy.
Because like mogging, I know is like you're foiling something. Right, so it's like he'd be offense mogging with his coach maxing or whatever. I don't know. I think I just made half our listeners' ears bleed trying to explain that. You know, I'll look it up. Give me your thoughts. I'm going to look up Gen Alpha slang here.
Tremendous. So the step up kind of worries me a little bit in the competition going from USF to Auburn. The whole wide receiver room for USF is pretty much transferred with them along with Byron Brown. I think 5 total wide receivers from USF transferred to Auburn. So the transition of the scheme should be swift. But what is this USF? What is this USF? I say that with quotes. If not on the YouTube, offense going to look like in the SEC? The sample size we have is small with his time as a Bull, but in 3 games against SEC teams, I'm talking about Byron Brown here, he's averaged 51.9% completion percentage, 141 pass yards, and 0.33 passing touchdowns per game. That is not great success. 2 of those games, granted, against Alabama and 1 of them against Florida. I think you mentioned there was a 4th game there, Jared, but I didn't go back that far. He did find some success rushing the ball, over 2 games over 100 rush yards, and USF averaged 12.3 points per game in those 3 games. So wasn't a prolific offense like we've seen. Yeah, it really isn't. And so the offense can be good. We've seen it be good, but the schedule has me so hesitant in investing in this offense or anyone outside of Byron Brown, especially in best ball. You know, I'm going to take a chance on Byron Brown because, like you said, the boom weeks could be there. The offense last year ranked number 2 nationally in total offense, number 5 in scoring, and posted 500+ yard games in 8 of the last 9 games. So Byron Brown, just the 12th 300-yard passer and 1,000-yard rusher in FBS history during the 2025 season. He really took a step up, stretching the field as well. But I'm not overly optimistic in what they're going to be able to do offensively. His time at Tennessee, they broke some offensive records, but I don't think this Auburn team is going to be what that Tennessee team was. The only, the beginning, the first game of the year, they got Baylor. Week 12, they got Samford. So that's possibly lining up to be a great high-graded matchup for fantasy points. But outside of Byron Brown, I don't think I'm going to be touching anybody in this offense, man.
I would first like to say that I actually did use the mogging term correctly, turns out.
You did?
Because mogging is a Gen Z slang for, quote, visibly outshining, dominating, or looking much better than someone in terms of attractiveness, style, or physical presence. When I say offensive mogging, he is outclassing you with his offense. So I don't know if that says something good or bad about me. But yeah, I fully agree with you on almost every point. And again, to to the point about this offense, Tennessee's had to move away from this fear and shoot offense. They're starting to move towards a more pro style system because SEC defenses were starting to kind of figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be some adaptation here with Alex Golesh. The good news is we have also seen when you bring guys who know your system, who have multiple years in your system, that's a huge advantage.
Massive.
Right?
Yep.
And so you're able to execute at a really high level, and that's kind of what Auburn's banking on here, at least in year one. Then they can start recruiting. Hopefully they can have some offensive prowess that convinces some higher grade recruits to come in. But we'll see. All right, we got about 5 more coaches to get through, but first we're going to send it over to an ad read. If you're listening on the Campus to Canton Podcast Network, we'll be back with you in just a second. For those listening anywhere else, we'll see you guys in just a second. All right, Chris, let's move on. Let's go on over to a surprise coaching change for sure. I don't think many people had Chris Kleeman retiring from Kansas State on their bingo card for this year, especially since Kansas State's previous coach before that felt like he was there for nigh on 5 decades. But it allowed them to make a really good hire here, in my opinion, in bringing back Colin Klein, their former offensive coordinator from 2 years ago. Last year, Colin Klein was the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. Obviously, Marcel Reed and Casey Concepcion did really well under him. Now he comes back to Kansas State, hopefully to figure out this offense much better than whatever the heck they tried to do last year. Matt Wells as an offensive coordinator for Kansas State was just an abject disaster. To give you an idea, Avery Johnson under Colin Klein 2 years ago was QB 18. Last year, Avery Johnson, with so many of the same weapons coming back, QB 51. Now, granted, he was better in the second half of the season than he was in the first half of the season. I feel like that was after Matt Wells lost his play calling duties. But man, if you're in love with CFF, you gotta love what Colin Klein did in just his 2 years at Kansas State. Just the names here: Avery Johnson, Will Howard, who's a top 10 quarterback for CFF, Deuce Vaughn, DJ Giddens. Like, these were guys that absolutely cooked for CFF in their years under Klein. And then last year, as I mentioned, Marcel Reed, Casey Concepcion, they also did extremely well. I feel like Le'Veon Moss, had he been healthy the whole season, probably would have done well under Colin Klein as well. So that kind of leaves the question here, Chris, of one, are you back to investing in Avery Johnson? I know I am personally. I think I've grabbed 2 shares of him already in best ball drafts. And then 2, a lot of people have kind of been worried about the fact that Kansas State brought in quite a few running backs into this running back room via the transfer portal, and thus maybe we should be worried about Joe Jackson. But history tells me, for the most part, Colin Klein loves himself a true number 1 back here, given the fact that, Deuce Vaughn and DJ Giddens thrived under him. So how are you handling the Joe Jackson situation as well?
I'm not going to be too hesitant on drafting Joe Jackson. He's going in the top 5 rounds, which I think is right where he should be going. He's maybe not your running back 1 unless you go wide receiver heavy with your first few picks. And he could be a great compliment if he is your running back 1 on your team, if you do decide to go wide receiver heavy, because like you said, the system history has shown us that they like to carry, they like one running back to carry the load. And then with Avery Johnson's rushing abilities as well, he's going to work that into what they're going to want to do. So I'm a big believer on Avery Johnson. I'm going to be, I don't mind reaching up for the quarterback. We've seen the kind of production that he's had in the system. In the last 2 seasons, over 100 rushing attempts, 205 to be exact, 14 rushing touchdowns. So there's a great floor there with Avery Johnson. Just hoping that he can be a little bit better passing the ball. If he can, then there's great opportunity for Avery Johnson to finish as a QB1 overall on the season. Same as Joe Jackson. If he gets the volume, he's involved a little bit more in the pass catching role, then absolutely Joe Jackson will be worth every bit of draft capital that you spend on him. I know we're attacking Garrett Oakley as well, linking Cures there. I just don't know as of right now which wide receiver to grab in this offense. I don't know if you have any insight on that there, Jared.
I have a name for you, and that is Jaron Tibbs, who actually was out-targeted Jace Brown last year. Granted, Jace Brown played 2 less games, so on a per game basis, I think Jace Brown was still the number 1 wide receiver in that realm. But Jaron Tibbs returns. He is, I believe, the only one among the top 3 wide receivers that returns from last year. And this is kind of the interesting question, right? Because historically, Colin Klein hasn't really had a true number 1 wide receiver until this past year, when Casey Concepcion, a guy that, quite frankly, I wrote off and a lot of people wrote off, he turned Casey Concepcion into an absolute monster last year. As I mentioned before, Matt Wells did this offense no justice last year, so I can look at Jaron Tibbs and say, like, well, he only had 12.7 yards per catch last year. His yards per route run was only 1.77. Nothing elite by any stretch. He had less than 600 yards on 80 targets. Like, I could point to all of that, but I can also point to Matt Wells not really doing him any favors. Meanwhile, Colin Klein, I think, could come in, and if Tibbs is really good, he could play out. I have not added Tibbs to my rankings yet. I think that is somebody I'm going to add here soon, just to at least see where things kind of fall for him.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right.
I like that call. Where are you at with the tight ends? Garrett Oakley, much? You have Garrett Oakley and Cure close, or do you have Garrett Oakley well above what Lincoln Cure has the potential to put up?
As of right now, I got Garrett Oakley well above, mostly because, again, this could very well be a situation where I think we just got out ahead of our skis with Lincoln Cure a little bit. Granted, yes, he's the number 1 rated offensive weapon that Kansas State has brought in God knows how long. So I don't hate the line of thought that says, like, well, he got hurt last year, they're going to still try to get him the ball this year. Yes, absolutely. Right. But I have no idea how to project that. Right. I can take a look at the small sample size we got last year, try to figure out a way from there. But right now, I think I would rather just take the shot on them feeding their senior, letting Cure. We're talking about how things shift throughout the season a lot today, right? I think it could very well be Garrett Oakley starts off hot, Lincoln Cure takes over maybe as the year goes on, or at least starts eating into Garrett Oakley's target share more as the year goes on. As of right now, I'll happily take the shot on Garrett Oakley just being that guy potentially for the whole year. So
yeah, I'm with you.
All right, moving on to head coach number 7. This is one that you were particularly excited to talk about here, Chris. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say. But Ryan Silverfield, the former head coach of Memphis, is headed over to Arkansas, another G5 to SEC. Move up in competition for this system. He also brings along his offensive coordinator, Tim Cramsey. We've seen quite a few CFF grades over the last couple of years. I mean, Brendan Lewis was obviously great at quarterback last year, top 20 quarterback, or top 30 quarterback on the year, excuse me. And then the 2 years before that, running back was amazing. Mario Anderson and the Blake Watson, phenomenal for CFF. Running back, not so great this past year, but again, there's a lot of things that kind of go into that. At Memphis this past year, the offense was 31st in the country in yards per game. The rushing attack was very much their bread and butter. They were 35th in the country in rushing yards per game. And Brendan Lewis was a key part here, obviously, as well. QB 29 in fantasy points per game last season, 23.5 fantasy points per game. Meanwhile, running back, like I said, not as strong as in previous years, but still 14.3 fantasy points, even though there's a lot of chaos back there in that backfield from Greg DeRosier. And then wide receiver 1, Cortez Brom, when he was healthy, he was putting up some good numbers there as well. So, Chris, what are you expecting to kind of stay the same as Silverfield heads over to Arkansas?
Yeah, the scheme brings one of the clearer fantasy resumes in the country to Arkansas. Memphis finished top 25 in scoring all 4 seasons that Cramsey was the offensive coordinator, and averaged 36.3 points per game across 51 games. You mentioned the 2025 offense. The 2024 offense was probably even louder than what they put up last year.
Oh, certainly
35.7.
was.
Yeah, 35.7 points per game, 444.5 yards per game. It was good for 12th nationally in scoring and 16th in total offense. And the QB profile for this system is not just a statue passer, like you mentioned with Brandon Lewis last year, but even if the quarterback is more of a pocket oriented player, they're going to give you some supplemental ground production. Even if you go back to Cramsey's time where he was at Marshall, Grant Wells threw for 3,532 yards in the 2021 year, which ranked 15th nationally. Brendan Lewis last year, 117 carries, 829 rush yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, 9 rushing TDs. Now, we don't quite know who's going to be under center for Arkansas going into the year. KJ Jackson I believe was the only quarterback that stayed in that room. They are bringing over AJ Hill from their time at Memphis, but the QB has the potential to be a cheat code for what they want to do, at least at that position. You mentioned the running backs. Last year wasn't all that great, but if you go back to the years before that, and then the times at Marshall with Rasheen Ali, where he posted 1,400 yards and 23 rushing TDs. Brandon Knox, 1,300 rushing yards and 11 TDs. So, and we've also seen the wide receiver find some success in this scheme as well with Cortez Braum in 2025, 63 catches, 889 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Cramsey's track record says Arkansas should have a real shot at producing a startable quarterback, a touchdown-friendly running back, and enough volume to support a top-end pass catcher. If you're ranking the likely fantasy winners in this profile, it starts with the QB, running back second, and the wide receiver one is third. So depending on what spring gives us with who the starting quarterback is going to be, as of right now, I don't know where you're at, but I got AJ Hill just a little bit above KJ Jackson.
I think it's going to be one of the true competitions for this year. I mean, KJ Jackson comes in with the recruiting pedigree. I would like to look it up at the moment in terms of what exactly he was ranked in his class, but my Google Chrome has decided to completely freeze on me here. But the interesting thing is, I think that who wins that quarterback competition affects more than just the fantasy upside of the quarterback itself. We've kind of seen with Cramsey that when he has a dual threat quarterback, he's not going to rely on the running back as much, right? Or he's going to be more okay with like not having a top end running back. And there goes the Chrome. It has crashed. We'll get that back in just a second. But the point being that if KJ Jackson, who ran for 600 plus yards in high school and everything, we haven't seen him run a ton in college, but let's be real, like try to get my stuff back here. Let's be real, like he didn't have a ton of opportunities to do so, but he can run. Versus AJ Hill came out of high school designated a pocket passer. If AJ Hill wins the starting job, I am much more interested in the likes of Braylon Russell or Sutton Smith, who Cramsey and Silverfield brought over from Memphis. If Jackson's the lead guy, I am a bit more concerned, especially if they do split it between those two guys, that we just now have a three-headed rushing attack for Arkansas in a system that I'm not entirely convinced translates in year one here. But again, if Hill's the starter, I'm more interested in either of those running backs. Which one would you rather have out of those two running backs between Braylon Russell, who stayed with the program, could have transferred out, could be in for a bounce back year this year, or Sutton Smith, a veteran they're bringing over with them?
I'm gonna rely on Sutton Smith here. I'll obviously I'm rounding out my running back room. I see Braylon Russell there staring me at my face for my running back 9 or 10. I'll take a shot because you never know what's going to happen in any football season as much as we try to predict it. But Sutton Smith is the guy, at least early, I'm going to lean on in this offense, Jared.
Also, I will correct myself slightly. There is not a huge prospect advantage between AJ Hill and KJ Jackson. Both of them were 4-star quarterbacks coming out of their respective classes. In fact, both of them were top 15 in their respective classes. So this is, again, I think a legit quarterback competition between the two of these guys. We'll see how it kind of plays out. As for Russell and Sutton, I'm with you. I got Sutton slightly ahead of Russell. I got Sutton at QB RB 70, Braylon Russell at 73. Definitely something that, very late in the draft, if either one of them are there, I'll take a shot on either one. So.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on here. Let's go talk about Mr. Brennan Marion, one of the more interesting coaches in the country in terms of just everywhere he goes. He seems to leave a bad taste in people's mouth, but he is now on the move once again. He is headed over to Colorado, and in terms of some previous CFF greats that he has put together, Hajj Malik Williams at UNLV last year, Ricky White for the 2 years he was at UNLV was just an absolute monster. And then this past year, actually at Sacramento State, he turned Rodney Hammond into a absolute bell cow back over there. Would have been good for RB21 for CFF last year had they played at the FBS level. So again, Marion, very much a guy that is kind of like Lane Kiffin seems to highlight the talent on his particular roster. But again, those top wide receivers really do seem to follow Marion wherever he goes. I mean, Jordan Addison when Marion was the wide receivers coach at Pittsburgh, and then Xavier Worthy when he was the wide receivers coach at Texas, Ricky White at UNLV. So now for me, I'm eyeing not Danny Scudero, who's coming in for the transfer portal. I'm expecting Joseph Williams to move back outside. And that, to me, should be where our attention should be lying. I think Williams, year 2 with Colorado, could make a big jump this year. And especially since Marion has focused on those outside guys in the past, I think he might be the one we take a look at. But this all really hinges on the fact that Marion can get this Colorado offense back on track. The Pat Shurmur experiment was an absolute disaster last year. What are your thoughts, Chris? Do you think Marion can get things back on track and we get some CFF production out of the Buffaloes again this year?
He very well could, and Joseph Williams is probably one of the most talented wide receivers in this room. And if he moves outside, I like the prospect that we could get a great season or a decent season out of Joseph Williams. But it's really going to come down to, can Marion get the most out of Julian Lewis?
Mm-hmm.
It was a small sample size last year in the games that we got to see Julian Lewis start. But when it comes to pushing the ball downfield, when it comes to those deep ball attempts, which is where we want our quarterbacks to attack our outside wide receivers in order to produce those valuable fantasy points, his completion percentage on 15 attempts is only 40%. So it's not he's not the most efficient passer when it comes to stretching the field. So we might see a lot more of Marion kind of saying, okay, this is the quarterback I got. This is how I'm going to utilize this offense. And we see more of the slot wide receivers kind of take on the alpha role for this particular offense, at least this year. But I'll be interested to see what the news comes out for in spring, to see if they do decide to try to get this offense to stretch the field a little bit more, if they do decide to put the ball in Julian Lewis's hands a bit more, and see if they can kind of trust him to make those deeper passes. So I'm hesitant on picking too many guys out of this Colorado Buffalo offense, Jared.
No, I totally get it. Again, it all starts with the quarterback. If the quarterback is not doing well, then you don't want to have anybody around here, right? But that's going to be a big point for Dion this offseason, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Deion's a flashy guy. He wants a flashy offense. He wants those big splash plays and everything. So you have to imagine like that. I mean, that's what made Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter so fun to watch, was just the constant deep balls and them connecting on them all the time. He went and got Juju Lewis to be the successor to Shedeur Sanders. He needs him to improve greatly in year 2 here. So we'll see if Brennan Marion is going to be that guy to do so. But Brennan Marion, very much a guy that likes to take deep shots. So I have to imagine it'll be a point of emphasis for him as well. Second to last major quarterback or major head coaching change we'll discuss here is a guy that I personally don't really know how to handle this, because it's not very often that we are getting coaches moving down from the NFL to the college level at a coordinator position, a play calling position, but that's exactly what we have with Arthur Smith, the former offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Before that, the head coach of the Falcons. Before that, offensive coordinator at the Tennessee Titans. Zero play calling experience in the college ranks. Obviously, if you're calling plays at the NFL level, I have to imagine you're going to do pretty well here at the college level. But I think the major question here, Chris, and I'll very much throw this over to you, is we've seen Ryan Day mostly run his offense, even though we've had a couple of offensive coordinators kind of come and go here for the most part. What differences do you think we can expect with Arthur Smith leading this offense for Ohio State versus previous versions of the Buckeyes?
I think we're just going to see a lot of bigger personnel coming to Ohio State. It's going to be interesting to see how much of an influence Smith is going to be calling offensive plays for the Buckeyes. Is it going to be Ryan Day with Smith as more of a consultant on the field? You know, going from the NFL to the college football level, like you mentioned, how much of that NFL game is he going to bring with him to the Buckeyes? He ran some of the highest 12 and 13 personnel groupings in the NFL with his time as a head coach or an offensive coordinator. So we could see a situation where we see a lot of 2-3 tight ends on the field at the same time. And you know, what does that ultimately mean for the wide receiver room? We can expect Jeremiah Smith to still see heavy usage in the passing game. But Smith's calling card is efficiency and volume. In 2020, his Titans were the number 2 ranked offense in total offense, 396.4 yards per game, number 2 in rushing offense. So are we going to see Ohio State? Did they bring in Arthur Smith to kind of better what the Ohio State rush offense was, at least going back to last year? There is some explosive play hunting baked into that. The same 2020 unit with Tennessee, they were first in 50-plus yard plays with 10, and first in 50-yard plays with 10. And you know, I can't stress this enough. Red zone efficiency, third down efficiency is what ultimately is going to produce, you know, consistent fantasy points for you. And his teams have always been great at those spots, or at least very good. So sustained drives, like I touched on with Whittingham and Beck going to Michigan, sustained drives lead to more yardage, which give you more opportunity for touchdown finishes. We've seen running backs be part of the main part of the ecosystem of his offenses. And we've seen, obviously, some quarterbacks create a decent floor with rushing as well. Ryan Tannehill threw for over 6,000 yards in this time with Tennessee. And we've seen with his time at Pittsburgh, it was a really run-heavy offense. The Steelers were 11th in rush offense and 4th in most rush attempts. So there is a possibility where Ohio State kind of takes a little bit of a step back in passing volume and tries to establish a little bit more of a running game. And that bodes well for fantasy managers who are drafting the likes of Bo Jackson.
No, I definitely would agree. And even if they take a little bit of a step back in the passing, it may not be the worst thing in the world, because one, I think Jeremiah Smith will still get his. But quite frankly, I think outside of Jeremiah Smith, is this not potentially the weakest wide receiver room we've seen for Ohio State? in quite a bit of time. So maybe they're not wanting to rely on that pass game as much as they've had in recent years. Like you don't really have a true number 2 guy there at Ohio State right now.
Come on, Jerry. You're not a believer in Devin McEwen or Brandon Innes?
No. No, I'm really
Straight up, no.
I'm really not they got to prove it to me.
Yeah, that's
But
fair.
I again, I agree, and this will help out Bo Jackson quite a bit. I mean, he had 178 carries last year as a true freshman. I still worry somewhat that again, Brian Day very much is big on load management. I do wonder if they're going to be able to do that as much this year, though, because I do think this is a shallower team for Ohio State than they've had the last couple of years. So we will definitely see. Let's talk about our last coaching highlight here, and that is offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey, formerly of Michigan, heading over to Missouri after obviously Sherrone Moore was fired. Chip Lindsey was not retained. Missouri came in and scooped him up after their offensive coordinator Kirby Moore moved on to be head coach at Washington State, which I imagine we will discuss next week. The major question I keep hearing from a lot of people, though, is, again, a lot of good running backs coming back this year, Ahmad Hardy among them.
Beast.
Does this hire disrupt Ahmad Hardy in any way, shape, or form? And I'm here to tell each and every one of you, no, don't worry about it. Ahmad Hardy is going to be just fine. In fact, this might have been one of the best offensive coordinator hires that they could have made in order to protect Ahmad Hardy, because boy, oh boy, Chip Lindsey the last 4 years has just been dominant with RB1s. I mean, Justice Haynes last year was set to be RB6 on the year if he kept the pace that he was going. Amarian Hampton was a top 10 CFF running back for 2 years in a row. Isaiah Bowser, not as good because he just wasn't as good of a running back. He still got 200 plus carries from Chip Lindsey when he was the offensive coordinator there at UCF. In fact, amongst the last 4 years as offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey RB1s have averaged 225 carries in those years. Ooh. And that's what I project Ahmad Hardy at this upcoming year. And guess what? That's still good enough to get Ahmad Hardy in my top 5 running backs for the year. Don't worry about this whatsoever. Ahmad Hardy's going to be just fine. If anything, this is a slight downgrade, I would say, for the likes of, if you're trying to trust in Austin Simmons, or if you're trying to trust in Caden Lee, I question them a little bit more, but Ahmad Hardy's going to be just fine. Your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah. I'm not too worried about Ahmad Hardy at all. I'm going to be taking him where he's going. I'm not going to drop him down my rankings at all, especially because who's saucing the rock over there at Mizzou this year?
Austin Simmons.
Oh, yes, that's right. The transfer. Yeah, my guy, Austin Simmons, Caden Lee in the slot, playing the slot role for this offense. So I actually kind of like that a little bit more for Ahmad Hardy if they can get an efficient pass game going with this offense, which we know what Chip Lindsey likes to kind of run, a balanced, fantasy-friendly scheme. So if we can get efficiency out of the pass game, that's only going to open up more opportunity for Ahmad Hardy. So I like the scheme that he's bringing over. I like the potential for fantasy production, both out of the quarterback, the running back, and the main wide receiver. So I kind of his best offenses have consistently shown they can support 3 phases of the game. So the balance is going to bring some real volume for each position. So I like the hire.
I definitely like the hire. I do question the upside of like Austin Simmons in this offense. I've got Austin Simmons currently as QB 90 right now, mostly because the only time that Chip Lindsey has really produced for CFF at the quarterback position was when he had Drake May. Right, and that's clearly now one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That was just a talent that he was able to take advantage of while he was there. I don't think Lindsey's the kind of offensive coordinator that can really elevate a quarterback in the way that like Lane Kiffin can. You look confused, Chris.
No, I'm just reading something. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're good. I was trying to make sure am I saying something wrong?
Oh, yeah, no, you're good.
I make that
But
exact same
was it?
face when I'm like, go
Yeah,
ahead.
but wasn't he part of Jared Stidham at Auburn as well when Jared Stidham put up that big year?
Let me
The
check. I don't think
3,000 pass yards.
so. I don't remember him being Auburn. Oh
Lindsey
yeah.
directed
Oh
an
yeah.
Auburn offense in
What?
2017. Yeah,
Yep. That is true. But that's also Gus Malzahn, right?
that's fair. That's also a solid point. Yep, that's a solid point.
Yeah.
But with that,
Oh
he
yeah.
was part of producing a very uh, solid production out of Jared Stidham at Auburn. So
Hmm.
the opportunity can be there. It's just whether or not Austin Simmons can take advantage of that opportunity in this system because he's got the pieces around him. The run game's there. His buddy Caden Lee came over from Ole Miss with him. The scheme's there. Can Austin Simmons put it all together at Mizzou? That's
I
what's
I
going to
would
be.
I would also raise you that Chip Lindsey led Bryce Underwood, the number one quarterback in his class, to
There
QB
you go.
118.
There you go. I mean,
I would also raise
can't
you this.
can't have it all.
Can't have it all. All right,
Can't have
Chris,
it all.
let's finish up here. Let's talk about some honorable mention quarterback or honorable mention coaching changes here. Really, again, this was such a wild year that in previous years, almost all of these guys probably would have made it into a full-on deep dive here, but I'll run through them real quick. James Franklin going from Penn
Yeah.
State to Virginia Tech. Chip Kelly, former offensive coordinator with the Raiders, now going to Northwestern. That's a big-time hire for them. Clint Trickett, the former offensive coordinator at Jacksonville State, headed over to Maryland. Kendall Briles, the former offensive coordinator out of TCU, headed over to South Carolina. And then Will Stein, the offensive coordinator at Oregon, headed over to Kentucky. Let's quickly talk about the major coaching change hire we haven't really touched on. That is James Franklin going from Penn State to Virginia Tech. Major in terms of the sport, not so major in terms of CFF. In fact, the projections I have for quarterback here with Ethan Grunkemeyer are not pretty. He just keeps getting lower and lower as I add more quarterbacks. He's currently QB 100 in my
Ooh.
rankings right now. Yes, I know, not pretty, but boy, is not Grunkemeyer wasn't pretty either. So I'm not so interested in the quarterback. I'm definitely not interested in wide receiver unless unless it turns out they have a secret NFL talent like a Jahan Dotson level guy on that Virginia Tech roster, which I don't know about you, Chris. I can't point out who that could be. I am
Cannot.
interested in running back, though. We have seen plenty of solid running backs come out of James Franklin over the years. And the two main candidates, in my eyes, are Marcellus Hawkins, who was pretty solid
Mhm.
for Virginia Tech last year. They retained him, right? 744 yards on 119 attempts. Very, very solid. Only one touchdown on the year. But they also bring in Bill Davis, coming over from Louisiana, who had his own solid year with 158 attempts for 767 yards and 6 touchdowns there for the Raging Cajuns. Chris, are we looking at a duo in the backfield that's going to eat into each other too much, or do you think there's a possibility of a guy emerging here between the two of them?
Right now, it's going to be hard to say. And prior usage, we've seen Katrin Allen and Nick Singleton be the dynamic duo at Penn State. So it's going to be hard for me to say, yeah, there's going to be a guy that solidifies himself as the RB1 in this room without some kind of injury or without, one guy really struggling over the next guy. So I can't say that there's going to be one guy that I'm going to actually target over the other. But the one guy that I kind of find interesting on this team is going to be Luke Reynolds coming over from Penn State.
Good
They
call.
elevated Ty Hole, the tight end coach, to like offensive coordinator. So there's good chance that Luke Reynolds sees a uptick in his usage from what he was being able to put out last season when we were all kind of relatively high on what he should have been able to do with Tyler Warren leaving. So that's probably the number one. I don't even want to say the number one pass catcher I want to target in this offense, but he's like, maybe the number two pass catcher I kind of want to target in this Virginia Tech offense, at least early.
I'm going to go back on something I said here in that there's no
Ooh.
wide receiver I'm interested in here. Definitely not taking him high, but maybe as a last round kind of guy. I did forget about Aiden Green, who did lead Virginia Tech in targets last year with 63,
Yep.
16.7 yards per catch. 1.57 yards per route run. Not elite, but pretty solid. That might be a name I might take in like the last couple of rounds just to see if he can kind of take that extra step there. I'm definitely not in on Keyshawn Brown though. Coming in, no, I'm not drafting that.
So
Who
no
else?
from you, dog.
Who else in this five here do you want to touch on real quick, Chris?
I mean, Clint Trickett's an interesting one, especially with the offense that he's bringing over from Jacksonville State to Maryland. We've already identified Dewan Williams as the guy potentially in this running back room to be the one to target, considering what Cam Cook was able to put up last year with Jacksonville State. Dewan Williams can walk in and potentially be that guy for them. So he's an interesting one. It's going over to Maryland. Kendall Browse that we talked about last week going over to South Carolina. And then I'm really interested to see Chip Kelly. I know it's kind of crazy, maybe a little bit crazy to say, but I'm kind of interested to see what Chip Kelly does at Northwestern. Northwestern last year was near bottom of the league when it came to plays per game. So I'm kind of want to see if they get a little bit more of a faster moving offense. We've seen these Chip Kelly offenses be sometimes maybe good, sometimes it may be so I'm not too optimistic on
You're making me have to edit in a bleep, Chris.
Sorry, Jared. I couldn't leave that one out there. But Caleb Komolafe, obviously a guy you're targeting in this offense. Gavin Sawchuk transferred over it as well. But like we touched on in the running back transfer episode, we're not overly worried about Sawchuk. So we're okay investing in the Komolafe ADP at the moment. So that's an interesting one for me, at least, because I want to see how much it changes what the Northwestern offense is going to be. Which one are you more interested in there, Jared?
I mean, obviously, I'm a systems guy, so like I like Clint Trickett headed over to Maryland. I moved Dewan Williams up in my rankings a little bit. I still have some discounts on him because again, if I just pure projected him based off of what Cam Cook and Rasheen Ali did the last two times Clint Trickett was called,
baby.
yeah, if you'd be talking about a potential top 3 running back, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what I did. I do have Dewan Williams in my top 30 now just because of that potential there. Chip Kelly's also an interesting one because, like he's like he leaves a sour taste in people's mouths now because he failed with the Raiders last year. But let's not forget he was a national championship winning offensive coordinator 2 years ago.
Buckeyes, yeah.
Right. Like now, granted, you can argue of how much he actually had to do with that outside of the fact that Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and everybody just going buck wild for the Buckeyes. But I'm interested. I'm with you. I'm interested to see what he can do at Northwestern. I think he'll be the best offensive coordinator they've had there in a while. They got good pieces, Aiden Childs, and obviously Griffin Wilde as well, and then Kamala Faye. He's got pieces to work with there. And then they got a tight end coming up from I think it's like Minnesota Durham or something like that. Luke Denicky, who is supposed to be a really solid receiving option as well. So I think he'll have some things to say there. Kendall Browse to South Carolina is interesting to me. I think he's exactly what Lenore Sellers and potentially Nick Harbor need. So if you want more of my opinion on that, go check out last week's episode. I talked about both of those guys in that episode. And then Will Stein, I want to be more excited about, but boy, it's just a lot of odd pieces he's bringing in here, right? Because you got Kenny Minchie, quarterback coming over from Notre Dame. You got Nick Anderson, who hasn't been healthy for 2 years, potentially being your wide receiver 1. But he's following his offensive coordinator, Cortez Braum, here. And then you got 2 borderline washed running backs in CJ Baxter and Javante Barnes coming over from Oklahoma. I trust Will Stein. I think he's a good offensive coordinator, but boy, not a lot of pieces that I love. I love taking shots on here. You got an opinion on that, Chris?
Not a big opinion on what Will Stein is bringing over to Kentucky, but I can't believe you called CJ Baxter washed, man. That one.
I said
That one hurt,
borderline
Jared.
washed.
That
Borderline.
one. I might have to take next week off. I'm so hurt, man.
Borderline washed, good sir. But like, here, let me give you an idea. So like, I have Minchie ranked, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Minchie is QB 76 for me. I have Baxter ranked. Baxter surprisingly is RB 48 for me. I think that's your most likely chance at there being a CFF option here. And
That's
then
not too bad right now, though. That's not too bad right now.
And then I got Nick Anderson at, where are you? Wide receiver 72.
See, washed. See, Nick Anderson, if you said washed, I wouldn't have been so hurt.
Again, I have Baxter at RB 48, but boy, it doesn't feel good at RB 48. Did not feel good
You think
to me.
you should have him higher? Like RB?
No, I feel like it should be lower. Just being honest. Like,
no, yeah, I got you.
All right. I think that's it. I think that's all we got for Power 4 coaching changes. We got G5 coaching changes next week, as we kind of discussed before the show. There's a lot of really fun ones to discuss next week, so y'all be sure to tune in on that. Chris, you got any final words before we get out of here?
Yeah, make sure you head over to campus2canton.com and pre-order your freshman and supplemental guide. I know you guys have been hammering away on that, putting in the hours and all the hard work that goes into something like that. So make sure you head over there and support the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the CFF teams put in 30 supplemental players for you guys. Whether you're in a C2C league or a CFF Dynasty league, it applies to both for the most part. So I would highly recommend getting that. It's only I think it's $20. Yeah, I think it's only $20 for, in my opinion, one of the best guides you can get out there outside of the CFF guide that we produce later in the summer, obviously. But the freshman supplemental guide, I definitely use for freshman research every single year. So go check that out.
It's tremendous.
All that being said, though, we have come to the end of our show, Chris. Appreciate all of you guys out there for listening. If you have not already, make sure you leave a like, a comment, subscribe if you're watching this on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you go check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you could think of related to the college fantasy game. And like I said, we'll see you guys back here next Monday. We got G5 coaching changes. That will be a ton of fun. Until then, really appreciate you guys and hope you guys have a wonderful, blessed week. See y'all.